Right, well, welcome. Lovely to see you all, and lovely to have been gathering with those of you who got here early. I was slightly late, though I was supposed to be earlier. And it's amazing to be starting this kind of bizarre and ridiculous exploration, traveling around the world, going from here to North America, to Peru, Colombia, Aotearoa, Arnhem Land, West Papua, Indonesia, then around to Kenya and Tanzania, and then back. So it's been really throwing my sense of time and space into strange relief to find that the Pacific stretches halfway around the world. My maps are always kind of with Europe in the middle, and then the world stretches to the edges, and actually it's a very different world to the one I thought. And I think if you're staying for the whole ride or coming back for parts, you'll find it's a very different world in very different places with very different struggles, but all probably, we'll find out, probably quite similar in terms of what we're having to deal with in terms of the destruction of our social and ecological worlds, and the ways in which we are kind of allow ourselves to be captured by a system which is not going to save us from itself. So this is us just trying this experiment, building on the Reworlding Week that quite a few of us were at back in May, and just trying to see how can we have leadership that is collective. How can we not have somebody like me speaking now as if I'm telling you something that you don't know, but me just sharing where I am and then passing it on to whoever's next, Eva, Teresa, Dieter, Fede, if he gets here, Maria, Milka, if she gets here, Vasna, Ruth, Anne and Mikey. So just passing it around with each of us just saying something of why we've come here, why we've helped organise this. And then after that, we're going to have the Scotland Circle with some of the same folk, but a whole bunch of other folk speaking in terms of the experience in Scotland of the system of domination and how it impacts us and how it traumatises us. And also the ways in which we stay connected with each other, the ways in which we maintain ourselves and resource ourselves. So I'm experiencing a really lovely moment now where I'm feeling the bit of me that can be a lecturer and can be telling people things that they don't know. And I'm experiencing the part of me that feels really connected to you all, both people that I know well and people I don't know at all. And that's, for me, the kind of, at the core of this is just learning to transmute from performance, or from we'll show people the way, or from we'll impose a solution, or you must agree with me, my way is the right way, to actually really deeply listening to each other. So the idea is that we're really here to listen, and that when we're speaking, we're trying to deeply listen to ourselves and to each other, even as we're speaking. So that's what I'm trying to do just now for me. I'm trying to not say something I might have said, but just say what's here now. And what's here now is really, really rejoicing in being with people who clearly deeply care about what's happening in the world, and full of grief at what I see going on, and full of hope that we can transform the situation, but only if we take a completely different route that doesn't rely on any of the pathways that we've been taught to pursue. And somebody had the metaphor of a ball of string, and when you get a knot in it, when you pull, you just make it tight. It was Eva. You just pull it tighter and tighter. And what we're trying to do is loosen up, really loosen up, so that we can let this ball unknot inside us, the trauma inside and the trauma outside, allow us to find a pathway with that string. So that's my little bit. It's just my little bit, and I'll pass that on to Eva.
Thank you. I was listening to you and also thinking about what I was going to say and not managing to do either completely. So I'll just need to think. Well, I feel really excited. It's amazing to have been, again, sort of putting all this work into this strange event that doesn't have a place to happen in, and doesn't, we're not going to feed anybody or kind of have refreshments. As I've had a long time of making events, and it's only in the last couple of years really that I've been doing online things like this. So it doesn't have a place to be in, but it will, like Justin was saying, go into lots of different places. And there's something quite magical, it almost childlike for me, in the idea that we're going to go all the way around the world. I think is the kind of thing I would have thought of when I was like 5 and gone, oh, just as you learn that you actually live on a globe. And and have so little real sense of that. And the sun, the earth goes around the sun, but it's the sun that goes, you think the sun goes around you, but actually we're going around the sun. And yeah, it feels quite, I can hardly believe that we're going to do something like that. It feels like such an extraordinary thing. And it also feels like such a kind of like, such a pointless thing in lots of ways. We're going to speak to like hardly any people, just dotting into, tiny little communities or collections of people, 12 people, 20 people, how can they possibly speak for anybody more than themselves? And we've been really clear that we're not wanting anybody to speak for anybody else. Nobody is representing anybody or anything. The idea, the encouragement to everyone has been speak for yourself. And yet we do believe that when people do that really honestly and transparently, that there is something sort of quintessentially human that comes through, and that we'll meet lots and lots of different kinds of humans on this crazy magical journey over the next 24 hours, however much we manage to catch of it. That's all from me. So I'll pass on to Teresa.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess what I'm with is the excitement of jumping into an experiment. Today I've had last minute calls with translators that will help us to translate from actually 3 different local languages, then to Swahili, and then from Swahili to English. So we're actually able to understand each other. Or this morning with folks from Indonesia that are going to translate that session. There will be people traveling by boat to meet on an island to watch the sunset together and to perform rituals for us. There are people that are currently also really facing the threat of eviction of their own land, but they will make the effort to be with us. There are people that might have really sketchy internet connection if there is a rainstorm, but they will try to be here with us together. And I feel very strongly from these last couple of years that I've been working with activist groups that what we really need to do in so many respects is to relearn how to be human and to be in our bodies, to show up, to be real with each other, to meet, to figure out how to do that, which is sometimes really, really hard across all of our differences. Communication is really tricky. Figuring out how to deal with our misunderstandings and differences is really tricky, but that's really the work that is worth doing. And just also invoking the magic that we created with Reworlding, which was the conference that we hosted in spring, Northern Hemisphere spring, before this event, that many of the things that we're bringing up here today have been tested and born out of. I was just really amazed with how people showed up in these spaces. And what we're really trying to do here is not to create something very polished, but something from people for people. So bear with us. We will be transparent about when we're trying to figure out how things will work. And thank you so much for joining and for traveling and for being brave. I'll pass on to Dita.
Thank you, Teresa. Yes, I want to start with a moment of silence. It's one thing that I miss in my life is spaciousness and time, and how beautiful it is to share that with people from everywhere in the world, or not everywhere, but so many different places. And for me, this opportunity today is to listen to my thoughts and my emotions and my connection with everyone and with nature, from the voices of people from the other side of the world, or to listen to things that I haven't thought of, that I haven't dreamed of, that I haven't imagined, things that will shock me, will make me cry and feel sad and angry, but things that I need to hear, things that I need to know, because they are happening. So for me, that is the beauty of this gathering that has emerged like magic from the dreams of a bunch of crazy people that I love so fiercely. And I think something in me tells me that this is so important, and it's small, perhaps it's tiny. And yet somebody was saying a few days ago that many of the bad things that are happening now started with a few people. What if the return from that, the return from the flow of madness that we have, is also starting with a few people? I think that what we will hear, perhaps not from me or from ourselves, from each of us, but from others, may break our hearts in a way that allows us to connect more with the world. And that's my hope, and that's my secret hidden agenda for this amazing gathering. I'm really grateful to everybody else in Grassroots to Global for being mad enough to dream this, and for everybody who's here for coming along and wanting to play. And I see that Fede, I think he's not yet here. So I'm going to pass to Maria, who's also not here. Vasna.
Thank you, Dita. Hello, everyone. I wanted to start my few words by sharing a statement that comes from my home country, South Africa, and it is Umuntu Ngamuntu Ngabantu. And the shortened version of that is something maybe you've heard, the Ubuntu philosophy, which says that I am a person because of other people. It is only that we are truly human because of our connections to each other, because of how we be with each other in the world. And I think that that common humanity is something so important. And I'm so excited about this space as a way for us to connect through that common humanity, our Ubuntu. But as I was thinking about this Sunset Assembly today, I was also thinking about who wasn't able to connect with us. That we're lucky that we're able to have these groups from around the world joining, but there are so many who will not be part of this Sunset Assembly because this very system is leading them to a place where it's just about survival, whether it's because of hunger and poverty, war and violence, or pandemics and sickness. And I think that part of our connection is also to recognize and hold in our thoughts and in our space all of those who are not here with us today and who will not have the chance over these 24 hours to connect. Like Dita said, and I am connecting to what you said, Dita, even though I'm not supposed to repeat things, it is about thinking about what we can do better and how we move beyond the sunset. But I see that we must do that through our common humanity and remember who is the us and the we that we talk about. It has to be all of us when it's one of us. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely to see all these faces in Scotland. I'm in Colombia. Haven't been able to get back since the whole pandemic thing started. So yeah, really nice to see such a varied bunch of lovely folk. I think the Sunset Assembly really captures people's imagination from being involved and trying to kind of organize a Sunset Assembly here in Colombia. A bit of a last minute kind of organization from me, but it's really yeah, like I said, captured people's imagination. And I think the idea of following the sunset around the world before the COP26 is such a contrasting kind of beautiful thing to do, when, of course, the COP and everything that will happen there will, you know, has the possibility to really change things, or perhaps not, but it will be kind of, you know, that high level government, huge amounts of important people coming from across the world, and it kind of feels sometimes that in that space, community voices are just lost, or just not really considered or not thought about, and it's just about the big important leaders who come on their jet planes. So I think, yeah, this opportunity to do something different, to open, or to kind of pressure, or to just kind of presence before it all starts in 24 hours, I think it's, yeah, just really a really great thing to be happening. And here in for the Colombian one, it's been a really yeah, inspiring kind of process of just getting people together, kind of starting off thinking, oh well, might not be able to organize anything, it's not much time, and then thinking, well, actually there looks like there may be like 5-10 people who are interested, so we can do an hour. And then so my Misak friend got in touch with all her you know, group of folk that she's involved with, and rang me up and said, there's going to be youth from the NASA, from the Witoto, from the Embera, from you know, all these different indigenous communities. So it's just kind of grown, and who knows, maybe no one will connect at 7 p.m. tonight, but I have a feeling it will be yeah, really beautiful sharing. So if any of you are up at 1 in the morning still, it will be translated to English, so it would be great if you can join. So yeah, I hope it all goes really well for everyone, and just really exciting to be a part of. Thank you.
So I think that's it for our organising group round, is that right? Okay, so now we are going to move on to our Scottish circle, the first circle of the many places we're going to visit. And we were all asked, and the question is slightly different in different places, but the main idea is that we were asked to consider our experience of the impacts of colonisation or of domination, or however you want to name it, this disastrous system that we're part of and have inherited from many generations. So to spend one round talking about those impacts that we notice, and that might be for you personally, that might be through your work. You might want to look at the history. It's really, you can take any take that takes your fancy or occurs to you in the moment. And then the second round is on what gives you hope, on what connects you, on what sustains you, on how you're resisting. So just, yeah, again, really kind of trying to speak from the heart, speak in the moment, to ignore the fact that there may be people in the room that you don't know, because we're all just people. Do we have the order of speaking for that? I think I can probably get it very quickly. I'm pretty sure I was going to go first, so maybe I'll go first and somebody else could find the order for everyone else.
I found the order. Yeah, you go.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's the baby granddaughter giving a yell, objecting. Yeah, it's so hard to know where to start. I remember doing one of the decolonisation go-rounds that we've done sort of as regular practice as part of the organising team. And we were asking, what are the impacts of colonisation on your experience of education, I think. And Maria just said, well, everything. It's just everything. And I think that was, that, you know, she unfortunately she's not here. We were hoping that she could speak as part of the Scottish Circle. Yes, there's so much of it. It's hard to pick. But where I'll pick is from yesterday, because we were doing another one of these bleeding rounds on land, and I was saying that the land that I live on is Votadini land. That's the last people who had a name who were uncolonized, as far as I know, and they were named there. We don't know their name. We know the Roman name for them. We know the colonizers' name for them. And there's something incredibly sad in that for me, that, you know, the kind of smashing of our indigenous culture here in Scotland is so far away that we don't even remember the names of our peoples. I don't think that's entirely true. I think there are roots in the language, but certainly for my part of the country, there's little there. What else? Well, the other thing that occurs to me, and I don't know why, but is just thinking of my life and my growing up. And I grew up basically under Margaret Thatcher. I mean, certainly my kind of coming into knowing about the world and what was happening was with this woman at the helm, this role model, who the first female prime minister, who was responsible for smashing up a good deal. It felt like everything at the time. Felt like she was responsible for smashing up everything that we commonly owned together. I think what I didn't realize was it wasn't everything, and they just carried on doing it over successive governments. But it felt, I remember saying, it feels like there's a bunch of vandals in charge of the country. And my perspective on that since then has only grown to feel that, you know, we have a system of domination in charge of people who don't care, who are brought up and taught and trained not to care about other people, and they are the people who have the power. And for me, this process that we're involved in, however crazy it it seems to be, is to try to explore and experiment with and model a different way of sharing decision-making power. Yeah, I feel really sort of passionately about it, and realize that I'm going on to the next round. So I will stop and go to David.
Yeah, I can speak next. Is it? Shall I speak next? Cool. Okay.
If you're happy doing it next, David, otherwise I'm happy to, whichever you like.
That's yeah, I'll keep going. I did get a moment of panic when I thought, oh God, I thought I was going to have loads more people.
Well, let's go with that. Let's go with that order then.
Okay, we'll go with the moment of panic order. Yeah, it's a real pleasure and an honor to be part of it, part of this. It's more of a reflection for the next part, so I'll go on to that. I think I tried not to sort of over prepare and come with something specific to say, but I think a lot of the work that we've been doing at Galgale in preparation for the Free State at COP26 has kind of got me in the mindset for it, and yeah, I've been kind of looking at and thinking about Freedom Come All Ye, the Hamish Henderson song, and that middle verse, which I wanted to read because I think it touches on anti-war, anti-imperialism, anti-racism, and there's something that I think is really poignant about the fact that it was written 40 or 50 years ago, and we still haven't kind of managed to wrestle that into reality yet. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, 50 years isn't very much. I think we don't think in terms of cathedrals anymore. We don't build cathedrals anymore, so we think everything has to be done. So maybe if we think of ourselves more as masons that are just building blocks for something that's going to happen much further down the road, maybe it's a bit more of a collective thing. But that middle verse, nae mair will the bonny callants march to war when our braggarts crousely craw, nor we wains frae Pitthead and Clachan mourn the ships sailing down the broomy law. Broken families and lands we've harriet, well curse Scotland the brave, nae mair. Black and white, ane another till married, mak the vile barracks of their masters bare. And there's some very specific Scots in there, but really the first couple of lines are saying, no more will we send our beautiful young men off to war when the rich and powerful say so, and no longer will kids from town and country mourn ships leaving from Glasgow. So Broomy Law's in Glasgow, so no longer will they mourn those ships leaving. And then there's something it's this line, broken families in lands we've harried, and particularly that word, that use of that word harried, I think is just so poignant, and it makes me think of original when land was physically harried. They used to do it with thorns. They would be huge like blackthorns, I think, that would be pulled along behind ox. That's how they would harry the ground, and then it makes me think of it's that vision of a crown of thorns, and imperialism as Scotland's kind of crown of thorns. That I just think there's something really in that imagery, something really beautiful in it, and obviously that bit right in at the end there about black and white, one another married, make the vile barracks of their masters bare, and it's only through that kind of very anti-racist, anti-colonial, anti-war place that we can make the vile barracks bare. There's so much in that, and I think for now it's just a really poignant thing. I think one of the things that's so difficult as a Scot, and I think it's very difficult for lots of Scottish people, is that we live with this. And, you know, Eva, you were saying about how, you know, kids are, well, the elite are kind of in Britain are kind of brought up and trained not to care about each other. And so there's this sort of really deeply entrenched lack of compassion. It's a system that's completely lacking in compassion, and the English public school system breeds people that have, you know, you take kids away from their parents at the age of 3 or 4 and you make them loyal to the, you know, the crown. Then of course you can, you know, when you enforce that trauma on children, you can expect them to go out and do it to other people. And I think it's a similar thing in Scotland, that we live with, yes, not even having any memory in lots of places of what our place names are and what those people were, and you needed to do that in order to make Scottish people go out and do it to everyone else. So we've got this as a people, we've got this really complicated, really uncomfortable kind of dual identity as the colonizer and the colonized, and it's hard to speak about because they're both traumatizing states. So yeah, I should probably I'll leave it there because I've probably spoken for longer than I should have done, but thanks so much for the invitation to speak.
Karen, can you follow? Is that okay?
Yep, thank you, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this connective space. I do find it quite daunting in a way. I just want to say that. But anyway, I'm over here on Bernary in the Outer Hebrides, where I used to live 11 years ago, but I haven't been back since. And these few days this week is the first time I've been back, and it feels quite unsettling in a way to be here at this point when COP26 is about to happen, because well, it's North Uist is a bit like a kind of lattice of peat bog floating in the middle of the sea, really. Bernary is a wee bit sort of greener, but the feeling of, you know, it wouldn't take much of a sea level rise to completely change how people live here, and they're already very aware of that. They've already had kind of fatalities in hurricanes, and they've had the rising sea levels and the coastal erosion. It's all sort of very obvious. But the other thing that's really obvious, and which it feels really important to think about, I think, is that the history, both prehistoric and more right through to more recent history, is so visible here in a way that it's less so on the mainland, where there's been different land use practices, and a lot of the visible, especially the sort of the more distant past, has been erased much more. In whereas here, when you're going around, you're passing brochs and seeing hills where there's lazy beds covering absolutely. You can see still the lines of the lazy beds covering entire hills, where you sort of think, God, some folk for a very long time must have struggled up to that point to grow their potatoes, and you know, working together to try to survive, going through famines, going through epidemics. You're surrounded by abandoned villages and abandoned black houses, but where you can still see the trace of what people's lives would have been there, and more recently abandoned houses where, you know, you can peep through the window and see the bits and pieces of people's lives. that were, for for all reasons we can imagine, no longer viable, and are gone. And I suppose it's just making me think about how did all of those people feel in the crises that they went through. There's like there's a famine road that goes over the hill really in Berneray. It feels like it. So it was a road that the landowner paid destitute people during a famine to build this road over the hill. I don't know if the road actually really had a purpose, or if it was just that they had to be working for that sort of, that was the deal. Yeah, and then I'm thinking of us or me, and I'm thinking of the privilege that I've had in my life. I've been lucky that I'm not at risk of destitution. I'm not living in a war zone. I've been lucky to live in relative safety in my life, and but those people lived in precarity and fear and threat, and they had much shorter life expectancy. But I feel like with the things that everybody's been speaking about and what we all know, we are looking at precarity feels like something that's growing, and the way things have happened in the last few decades really has also stripped away many of our safety nets of community support and genuine social networks, not the social network, but our genuine social networks, leaving people in much more precarious places. And I suppose I'm sort of thinking of the kind of window of privilege that sort of overused our resources, and now we're in this point where we need to face a survival challenge, just like the people before us faced many survival challenges. The difference is ours is globalized. So that's what I'm thinking about here on Berneray, and I'll stop talking now, but thank you for letting me be part.
Thanks so much, Karen. Zarina, let's go next.
Hi everyone, and it's lovely to be connected to everyone, and I just have to say that I love this space just because you can be, and there's not very many spaces that are like this, so thank you for creating this. So I probably see myself as a product of colonialism, and what I mean by that is so my parents were born in India before the partition. So India was a British empire at the time, and they were then displaced to go to Pakistan, and they lived in Pakistan for a few years and then came to Britain. Now, even before India, my great grandparents were from Iran, and when they were from Iran, it was the British that moved them and displaced them to India. Now, what the impact of this on me is that I have no idea who I am. Right. So, it's very hard being somebody of color and saying you're British, because you don't get recognized as being British just because you're brown skin. Doesn't matter how many generations you live in Britain. So in my family, we have 5 generations in Britain. So I've got 2 generations above me, 2 generations below me. But still, even like my grandchildren are still classified as being non-British, and seen as being non-British. But to them, they know nothing else. I know nothing else. I mean, if someone would say to me, go home, which is what I heard a lot when I was younger, being brought up, it was like, well, where is home? Where do I go back to? Pakistan, I've been to Pakistan twice in my whole life. I've been to Spain more times than I've been to Pakistan. So does that make me Spanish? India, my parents, because of the tensions between India and Pakistan, there's this whole stigma about being Indian if you're Pakistani, but neither of my parents had Pakistan nationality. They both still had Indian nationality, but yet they're still classified as Pakistani. And if you go back to like actually like looking at my heritage, which is from Iran. But even then, I have no idea what happened before that, because like my history, because of colonialism, is totally wiped out. So I have no idea who I am. And then to make things worse, I'm going to go on a gloom and doom thing here. I'm also from the northeast of England, right? So if anybody knows the northeast of England, it's Newcastle, right? Newcastle is not on the map, right? So if you're in England, right, the north of east of England doesn't really exist. The north of England is Manchester. If you're lucky, you know, you might as go as far as Leeds and York, but never beyond that, right? So even on like the British political map, right, Newcastle is a forgotten place. It's no man's land, right? And it's too south to be Scottish. So, you know, when the Romans came, unfortunately, the line just missed Newcastle. Otherwise, we could have been Scottish, and that would have been a much better place to be. But we're in this like no man's land. So it's even like from like being in Britain, like the place I'm from isn't really even a recognized place. So again, it kind of it bothers me. And you know, because sometimes I just don't feel I'm rooted anywhere. I don't have roots, and I get envious of people that do have roots, like Indigenous people that know who they are, they know their culture, and yet I could have, but I don't. So I'm a floater, as I see myself just floating about, trying to connect, trying to find my place in the world, and trying to find my tribe. But at the same time, I'm thinking, do I really want that space? Because in that space also comes borders and also comes restrictions. So is it better to be like me that doesn't have that connection, or is it not? I don't know. So that's the space that I'm in. Thank you. I'll pass it on to the next person. Sorry, I don't know who it is.
Hi, thank you, Zarina, and everybody else who's spoken. Before I start, I just want to say I might have to dip out at some point, but it's been a real honour to be invited into this space and to listen to you all as well. So I'm sitting in Edinburgh. That's where I was born, where I grew up. And it's sort of a strange place because it's all I've ever known. Like, I've never moved anywhere else in my life. And when I grew up, I always thought, oh, it's such a beautiful place. Like, look at all these gorgeous buildings. And then you sort of learn more about it. And all of that beauty is sort of stripped away because all of those streets have been built by like putting violence onto other people, like through the slave trade, through like the wealth brought through colonialism, from places like India and stuff. And it totally changes the whole meaning of the city. Like, I work in tourism and everybody comes and it's like, oh, it's so beautiful. But I think the question I ask myself a lot is like, what does it mean to be from a city which, you know, is built on so much violence, and even now it's not for the people who live there, so it's all for other people. And I love working with tourists and stuff. It's really interesting meeting people, but you know, people can't afford homes here. Even when I go to like, I was lucky enough to go to university and there's like no Scottish people, and being in like third year and people saying you're the first Scottish person I've ever met, it's like a really interesting experience. And so I think it goes back to what people were saying before about like that duality of, you're really privileged to be Scottish and you're part of like a global sort of 1% or something to grow up here, and yeah, at the same time you have that history of like being dispossessed and like not knowing your language, not knowing your culture, or even the little bits, the little strands which you do know, you're like mocked for and stuff for speaking Scots. You're told that you're not proper. But like you're saying, it's like Scotland and Ireland and Wales were like the practice ground for colonialism across the world, and they needed that to make the dispossessors elsewhere. And I think it's really, like, I remember like last year, 2 years ago, there was an oil spill somewhere on Turtle Island, and it was near a town called Edinburgh, and I was just like, ugh, like, that's so far away to me. I've never been to the Americas, but we're connected through like this long history. And I think it's easy enough to think that has nothing to do with me. It happened so long ago. But as far as I know, my family's from like Ireland and from East Lothian, and I could have family in the Americas, like ancestors who were there causing that harm as well. Yeah, and I think living in this sort of age is this, you have this weird stratification of people where you're looking out for power. But that's why something like this, like the Sunset Assembly, is just drawing out those webs between people and drawing us onto the same level, that we're experiencing this type of domination which is all connected, but just in such different ways. So I think I'll stop there, and I will have to go in a couple minutes, but I'm gonna hop in to witness some of the circles from other parts of the world as well, to sort of feel that connection. So thank you, and I'll pass on to Dorothy. Or if Dorothy's not here, I'll pass on to Callie.
No, Dorothy's here. She's just on mute. Go for it, Dorothy. We all do it.
I was just saying I was really moved by what I've heard so far. And really moved by what Zarina was saying. It really resonated with me. I'm sitting here at my work in Govan, but I was born and brought up in Govan. And Govan's really very close to Cessnock. And I think that's where there was so many Asian families settled here. I grew up with people here, but my local park, Belhouston Park, you would never see a brown person, brown-skinned child in there. They couldn't go in, it wasn't safe. Lots of the space, I grew up with racism. So yeah, that really moved me. I wouldn't know where to start in terms of domination, because it's just, you know, I think my life, I'm lucky, I was born in 1962, I've not experienced war, but my whole being has been shaped by war, I would say. My dad had his struggles, and he was too young to be involved in the war. But my gran taught me a lot about the war. She lived through 2 world wars in Govan, the Great Depression, abject poverty, even though they were working. And it kind of resonated me. I think it was Karen was talking about the landowner that got the people to, the destitute people to build a road because they have to be doing something, and kind of reflects the hostile environment to unemployed people that we have at the moment, and having to get your universal credit by logging onto a computer X amount of times a week. But yeah, back to, you know, my dad had his struggles with alcohol, as is really common in Govan and Scotland, alcohol and drugs. And my gran, when I was really young, and I never knew what she meant, but I understand that it really deeply affected my life. I went on to study trauma, understand my own trauma. But she would say to me about my dad, because he struggled with anger and rage. And she said to me when I was really young, your dad got evacuated. Well, all our kids got evacuated to Beath. And he was a lovely boy, but he never came back. So I never really understood what that was about at that age, but I understand it now. I understand what can happen to children when they're taken from their families and sent away while the other family members fight wars. And then there's the whole, David was talking about colonialism. We were talking about that the other day as well. You know, the whole thing of the pride of the Clyde. All my uncles and my dad worked in the shipyards, and this brilliant romantic notion. The shipyards were hell back then when I was a kid. All the men came back angry and upset. They weren't paid enough. The conditions were really poor. Saw an incredible program about South Korean shipyards recently, and I couldn't believe it, because even as a kid, I could get into Govan shipyard. Children were in, men were injured. There was no safety. And this South Korean thing I saw recently, it was like a science fiction. It was all so safe and so clean. And I thought, oh my gosh. But anyway, so I think my personal life was affected through my dad's issues. And then my stepdad, I really feel for him. He was in the Korean War, and he had terrible trauma that, like all the people in our families, they tend not to talk about it, but you hear them waking up in the middle of the night with their nightmares. Yeah, you see them triggered into memories that they never speak about till they've maybe got a wee drink in them, and then it all pours out. And then the difference between the pride of maybe my grandpa who fought in the wars and my uncle in Korea, that Korean War, prisoner of war. We didn't talk about that. There's no glory in that war. So yeah, I just feel that war is massive. And when I look at the rates of alcohol, drug use in Scotland and in Glasgow, and I've chosen to work in that field, coming from a family that experienced that. Yeah, I link it back to, we'll never go over the trauma of war and domination and inequality. And the Tories, when you're talking about Margaret Thatcher coming into power, just as I was leaving school. But one thing, even in trauma, before I went to school, my gran and her sisters had a big influence in my life. And they were so proud to come for Govan. And they taught about a lot of pride. And I was really proud going to Govan. And I remember learning that, gosh, we're poor. When I was much older, you know, primary school, you learn, oh God, Govan, we're poor. But we're wonderful people. We've got so much dignity, and, you know, colonialism then was sold to you as how wonderful you were at building these ships and traveling the world. You didn't get the story of domination and colonialisation, nor did you get the story of poverty. So you had this false pride. So yeah, and I think we're still getting over the wars, that's still affecting us as a country, as a nation, and facing up to being colonised and the coloniser. Yeah, it's a real complex mix that makes identity really difficult. And for me personally, coming to terms with my own trauma, I struggle. I got involved in politics really young, and left-wing politics and all that. But for me, I wasn't processing my own anger. And so for me, the journey is very different now. It's hard for me to look at Donald Trump, George Osborne, Boris. I get so angry. But the more I sit in silence and meditation, I'm still working through my anger, my rage, my greed. And for somehow, the journey to any peace and justice has to be an inner journey for me. I have to handle my anger and rage and not project it onto the Tories. And I understand there's power there, but there's power within us all. And I'm not sure, yeah, that's maybe enough.
Thanks, Dorothy.
So
Callum.
passing on to Callum.
Thank you.
I don't know if you heard what the sound was going in my head. It was like, if you could have heard it, it was like, oh shit, it's me. So anyway, it's me. Hello, folks. I'm Callum. Oh shit. I enjoy being honest, and I enjoy being forthright, and I enjoy talking. And a lot of what we've done is talked and listened with our heart, and I think that's me. You know, I'm honest, and my grandmother taught me a long time ago, don't tell any lies and you'll never get caught lying, you know. And I thought that was one of the truisms that stuck with me a long time ago, and sometimes I've taken that too far in telling the truth. But anyway, I think it's a characteristic that I have that I've enjoyed. Anyway, so I think the thing that most resonated me so far, I mean, there's been a few things that's resonated. One of the things was what Zarina had said about floating and not quite knowing where the identity sits and having different parts as made her up and stuff like that. And I'm the opposite of that. I know exactly what I am. I'm very, very clear to how my identity has been made up. I know that I've lived in Edinburgh all my life, and all the things that Niamh had said about wealth and poverty and juxtaposition, and that is part of my identity. I know that I'm male. I know that I'm working class. I know that I'm weird. I know that I'm Scottish, and I know that I'm a MacLeod. And there's a whole heap of stuff there I know that I have dyslexia, and I know that I'm not a good orator, but I speak from my heart, and that gives me confidence enough to say I live with whatever I say, and I'm happy with that. And in terms of thinking about what binds me and the lives that I've come through for. So when I said I had dyslexia, I really struggled at school when I first entered school, because I was punished in a lot of senses, not in struggle because I struggled with language, and that wasn't because I was dyslexia. It was because I was white, working class, Scottish, and I was learning Scots at home, and trying to write that down, and probably the difficulty of trying to articulate words that are not yours, that you don't get. And English is not a phonic language, so there are words in English. I can't even imagine how difficult it would be to learn English, just because of all the myriads that for someone from overseas who uses a different language. But I grew up learning it and going through all the struggling with that. And one of the things that I've done was we put both of my children into Gaelic medium education to reclaim part of my heritage. So I'm MacLeod, and I come from, my roots are in Skye and in the Western Isles. And I need to say hello to Dave because I connected with Gehan a while back, and Gail Gallen, and to kind of, I had a real powerful moment meeting up with her, and I could feel myself welling up just now. But going back to my white working class element of that, I'm a MacLeod, and I have three branches of my family, I think. But being white and working class, it was very gendered. It was very difficult in the poverty. It was very proud, but there was lots of alcohol. There was lots of violence. There was lots of domestic violence. There was lots of shame, and all the identities that I've identified with. There's an element of me that's quite, well, it's quite binary. I'm really proud of being white, working class, Scottish, a MacLeod, but there's also, each one of these is a badge of shame as well. So when we go back to the colonialism of that, and part of that is to tie them with Scottish history and subjugation, etc. But from a very personal point of view, I've watched the trauma that's taken place in my family, and what's happened to the women in my family. And my granny was a real role model for me. I was a carer for her before she died, but she, to her dying day, she wouldn't let me in the kitchen or do anything. You know, as much as I kind of really, that was her domain. That was where she was in control. And I bought things like washing machines for her. She still chose to do all the washing in the bath on the kind of on the board and so on, despite me having a electronic stuff. But she wasn't conditioned, but she had strict roles that she played that she'd learned over the years, and it was really difficult to not liberate. I'm not going to use the phrase liberate, but to support her through changing and challenging and that stuff. And I've watched that over a number of generations and watched gender equality growing in Scotland and in working class communities, because I work in working class communities, and I see the struggle's still there. It still goes all the way through from my family. It's still there every day. I work in a working class community. You see domestic violence all the time. You see poverty, you see violence, you see gangs, but you still see pride and people coming together. And the one thing that I wanted to kind of say today, I haven't thought about what I was going to say here, but the one thing that's, I've two things, and I'll say one in the next part, but the other part about thinking back to my families, I've got three branches to my families, I think. Two in my immediate kind of lineage, MacLeods and Butlers, and the other part of that is as a MacLeod and the Scots and the lineage and the heritage that goes with that. But the other part of my family, which I rediscovered, is not a bloodline. It's a tribe, and I reconnected with a lot of. Well, I found my tribe when I became an activist again. I've always been involved in environmental education, and to see such an not an extreme, to see examples of people who have broken shackles and realize what's right and what's wrong, and are determined in their fight to create spaces where people can live to the fullest of their abilities and against shackles for a whole heap of different reasons, but certainly for their physical reasons, for the physical bounds around them and economic bounds. So before I go into WAF, I think that's probably about me. And I would love to expand on what I've just said and make sense of it to myself, but I'm going to leave it at that and hand on to, I think it's Luke. It is Luke, if Luke's here.
Thanks a lot, Callum. Hope you can hear me all right. Thanks for the invitation, and it's been really great hearing everybody. And sorry, I was a wee bit late. I think I missed what Eva was saying. I mean, I'm speaking here from my flat in Govan, which is not far from the Clyde, and just another side of it is where COP26 is going to happen. And we're already seeing the road closures and the security perimeter being put up, and the disruption to the city, and it's definitely a sense of anticipation about, you know, it's coming, this is real. It's very complex. It's very complex if you're a Glaswegian, if you live here. There's a real sense of it being a global elite descending for an event that isn't for us, that isn't for most people. But yet there's going to be a huge disruption. There's going to be amenities put on that most people don't benefit from. So there's a travel integrated smart card that you can use across the buses and trains and subways seamlessly for 2 weeks for the COP26 delegates. But yet we're told that it's not technically possible to do that for people on a regular basis. So there's a glaring inequality there, which I guess just reminds us about the the nature of it. But also, this is a colonial city. You know, it's like, you know, what Dorothy was saying. You know, most Glaswegian were raised to think, we all know that it was the second city of empire. That was said with pride. You know, that was something to be proud of, to be prominent within empire was unquestionably a source of pride. And that goes in terms of the schooling that we had, the cultural environment. And you take a walk around Glasgow, you'll see Jamaica Street, Kingston Bridge, Tobago Street, Virginia Street, all the streets in the merchant city named after slave plantation owners. Buchanan Street, it was staring us in the face, really. And we don't like to reckon with that. So even the area where COP26 is going to happen, because the Glasgow's proximity to the North Atlantic trade winds is why the Clyde became, it got such a huge advantage when it came to shipping, not just Glasgow, but further down Port Glasgow, especially until the Clyde was widened. Ships leaving the Clyde were at the heart of the transatlantic slave trade. That was part of what was called the triangular trade. So it started in Scotland. It went down to West Africa, carrying glass, textiles, metal, guns, which could be exchanged for enslaved Africans. And those ships, starting in Scotland, would go down there. They would then go across the Middle Passage, the brutal slave transportation part of the journey, crammed into tiny spaces in the holds of slave ships for months, branded, sexually abused by the crew. About a fifth of slaves died. And then once they were enslaved in these plantations, the final leg of the journey saw the ships come back to the Clyde, laden with sugar, rum, and tobacco, which built the prosperity of the city. 30% of slave plantations were owned by Scots. Life expectancy on them was 4 years. And Glasgow would not exist if it wasn't for that. So that's the city where COP26 is happening. That's what built the city that COP26 is happening in. And there's still a legacy, not only in terms of economic inequality, global inequality, but in terms of the culture of the city. So, you know, we were chatting to Galgale about, you know, there's a Rangers match happening at Ibrox, Glasgow Rangers Football Club. Their stadium, Ibrox, is very near to where Galgale is. Apologies to any Rangers fans out there. There's many decent ones. I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush, but Rangers are one of the most prominent, and the subculture, the subculture of the fans is one of the most prominent vehicles of British nationalism in Glasgow. It's the only time you see a Union Jack about in Glasgow. It means Rangers loyalism. It means it's got a particular cultural signifier. You won't see the Union Jack in Glasgow. For our international friends, it is not a common symbol in Scotland in general. It's a very unusual symbol in Glasgow. If you see one in Glasgow, it denotes a particular worldview. And part of that subculture is, so one of the, when you come out of the subway, those of you who are maybe in Glasgow, when you come to the subway at Ibrox, you see the Loudon Tavern, staunch Rangers pub, and you'll see across the wall the sign, "We are the people." That's the big Rangers chant, "We are the people." And what that means is, you're not the people. You know, religious minorities, you're not the people. Ethnic minorities, you're not the people. And I grew up with that, you know. Irish, Italian, Catholic, you're a Taig, you're a Fenian. My neighbour downstairs is a big fan of the Sash and the Billy Boys, which is another Rangers song which contains a line, "We're up to our knees in Fenian blood, surrender or you die." And you'll hear that sung by 50,000 people in Glasgow, you know, every 2 weeks when Rangers play at home. It's basically, we want to genocide you. So when you grow up with that as a religious minority, it does do something to the psyche, you know. It does have that sense of, you're not really one of us, the majoritarian group. You're not really one of us, you don't belong here. And it's material, it's not just singing. You know, a couple of months ago, the third oldest Catholic church in Glasgow was burnt to the ground. St. Simon's and Patrick in Partick, that I attended many times and loved. A man was arrested for it. At the weekend there, Carfin Grotto was also burnt in an arson attack. 58% of hate crimes in Scotland are against Catholics, more than any other religious group combined. So you feel slightly targeted and persecuted, and you also feel solidarity with every other religious minority and ethnic minority who are going through that, and that goes internationally as well. So, and meanwhile, on top of all that, we're trying to put together some sort of programme or intervention around COP26, which probably we wouldn't be doing in terms of like our own organisation, Centre for Human Ecology, and enough. If COP was happening in another city, we probably wouldn't bother, because it's just part of this global circus that goes around from, you know, place to place. But when it's happening in your own corner, you feel a sense of hospitality. You've got to be a good host. You've got to welcome people, and you've got to, you know, you've got to invite people in and create an alternative. So it has a claim on us. We're compelled to respond to it, which we are doing. So, but there's a recognition that it's a flash in the pan. We're not confident there's going to be any meaningful deal. Baked into the whole process is not any critique of economic growth. It's all about financialisation, Green New Deal stuff, inclusive growth stuff. No critique of economic growth. And then when the circus leaves town, we're still going to have all these same problems. We're still going to have all the same issues. So part of what I really appreciate with this is a chance to kind of reflect and have a little bit of a pause and a bit of repose about, let's actually consider what's going on here on a deeper level. And I don't have any easy solutions to any of this. That's the other thing that's going to be sold at COP. Solutionism. Here's an easy solution to a complex problem. Like, it's not happening, you know? So that's my initial sharing. Thank you for listening. And I'd like to hand over now to Justin, is that right?
Yeah, we missed Mark Langdon off this, so Mark, do you want to go before me?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, it was supposed to be me.
No, I'm happy to go after you, Justin.
Good man, that's good. Wow, how can anybody go? There's so much. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've heard so much, and it's so powerful to hear people's experience mostly. I mean, that's what's really strong, is hearing that. And that's, I don't know who said about kind of Ireland and Scotland being the kind of the first places where empire was being practiced before it was being practiced elsewhere in the Americas and Africa and Asia, Australasia. And I guess it was also practiced in England with the enclosures. There was the, you know, tearing of people from the lands. There was a real struggle. It happened over a long period, over hundreds of years, and there was real pushback against it too. There was real appropriation of people's lands, and yeah, I mean, that was huge. And then there were the clearances, and there was everything that happened in Scotland, and that were tearing people from their lands. And when I'm in Kenya, when I'm working in Kenya with forest communities, and I kind of apologize, I always apologize for my grandparents, not my literal grandparents, but It was kind of what Dorothy was talking about, just that kind of, that history of war, the empire war. And I apologize for what my ancestors have done in Kenya. I mean, there were concentration camps by the British and everything. It was really horrendous what's happened, and I never learned about that at school. But then also when they hear about what happened here, they're astonished. Like the idea that colonialism happened here, that it didn't just kind of come from this very powerful West, but there was a whole process of tearing people from their lands before that was made possible to happen elsewhere, is somehow seemed pretty liberating for people in communities when they're listening. They're kind of going, oh, right, okay, so it's not a kind of irreversible power from the north coming down at us. This is what happened to us now, what's happening to us now, and it's happening right now in the communities I work with. We'll be hearing from them tomorrow. But I mean, what's happening here as well? And it's just like, for some reason, that's liberating to hear that it's this colonization process isn't happening from a strong part of the world to another part of the world, but it's happened in all these places here first, and now it's been happening elsewhere. So I guess in a way we have been living in a war zone for quite a long time. And Sarah Cordoves who's going to be, I think, in the Columbia session later, on Monday, she was saying that we're alive in a world that's dying. And that there's a kind of, that's hidden from us. It's hidden from us by our education system and by the media and by COP itself. It hides it from us. Like Luke says, it's all focused on all sorts of solutions. It's not focused on this system is killing us. So I guess that's what I've heard. I've just heard people's experience of how this system kills us, whether it's burning churches or whether it's poverty or whether it's traumatizing us in all sorts of ways, including, as somebody said, the kind of the powerful, and how the empathy's traumatized out of them, out of us when we're powerful, all of us when we're playing that powerful role that's not enabling. So yeah, so I'm really loving hearing people. I don't really have anything to say. I just love to listen, and I love to listen also to me. I guess I will share the bit I wanted to share. This is following on from David. Really, is that little poem, the "What is a Glen" poem. A glen being what would be called a valley in England. And what is a glen? Because it says it's in 3 lines. It gives you the ecological, geological, ecological, and social history of Scotland in 3 lines. And I love small things. So 3-line poem that tells you everything about Scotland. That's fantastic. I love it. So I'm sure you all know it, or lots of you know it, but it goes, what is a glen? Water, where once there was ice. Heather, where once there were trees. Air, where once there was breath. And that first line's just about the glaciers coming down, shaping the land, and then becoming water, becoming the rivers. And the second line is about how the forests were destroyed and heather's in its place. And the third line is about the breath of the communities that were living all over the land, that were cleared so that a few wealthy people could make a huge amounts of money, leaving only air. And I once put this up on Bella Caledonia, this poem, and I asked for replies, and there were like scores of replies of people giving, I asked for a second verse, and there were scores of them, and I'll try and find a second verse maybe for our second round, but just of how things are changing positively. So I should leave that, because this isn't supposed to be the positive circle. It's very hard. Some people have found the same. It's very hard not to move. David, you found that too, not to move into that. Like there's a real natural flow to feeling the grief of what's happened and then moving into that kind of resurgence. For me anyway, that kind of, just noticing that as a real, and I wonder whether that's about not really wanting to go deep into the grief. Yeah, is it a healthy move? Am I jumping off from the grief? Or is it a kind of resourcing move? Kind of, I don't know which. I'm just noticing it happening in me as I speak, that kind of pulling into, into the positive. But I guess I just want to acknowledge the kind of the killing that's happening right across the world, the killing that happened, and hearing about 4-year life expectancy on slavery plantations, on plantations where slaves were forced into labor. It's horrendous. And seeing people being thrown off their lands right now, horrendous. and seeing the empathy destruction of our system. It's horrendous. Yeah, so there you go. I'm trying not to go positive. I find it really hard not to go positive. I just gotta own up to that. Really hard. It makes it really hurt just to feel the awfulness of what's happening rather than moving away from it. Yeah, just acknowledging that. Okay, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. A woman who I know a little bit called Stephanie Pete, a good Scottish name, tweeted a little bit from Billy Connolly's latest book, and it says, avoid people who say they know the answer. Keep the company of people who are trying to understand the question. And it seemed very appropriate for this company. And in terms of my experience of colonialism, I've really enjoyed listening to people's stories. And so my story is, my dad was born in a wee Welsh mining village, joined the RAF during the war, went to India, came back and was able to go to university because he'd been in the army. Met and fell in love with my mum, who was from Ireland. They went as missionaries to India when my dad was head of Wilson College, Bombay. Then my brother was born in India, and then they came back, and one of my sisters was born in Ireland. My other sister was born in Scotland, and I was born in Belfast. And came over to Scotland when I was 3. I didn't realise I was Irish until I went to secondary school, and I told everybody in my first year class that I was both from Belfast. And from then on, I was Paddy. And to be quite honest, I was very happy with that, because I think I'd already at that time realised that I was a Celtic fan surrounded by Rangers fans, despite the fact my dad was a Church of Scotland minister. But he was also head of the chair of the Strathclyde Community Relations Council, and we had the dubious pleasure or the honour of the National Front phoning the house and saying they were going to firebomb it. So that was definitely shaping my understanding of the world. But I remember just as a kid, but thankfully my dad wasn't a parish minister, he was a lecturer, but he would stand in, he would do the sub, and I would go along to church as a kid, and I would absolutely have no understanding of what people were on about, because at the same time I was seeing footage from the Vietnam War, and really didn't understand how the world made any sense. And that's the journey I've been on and still on. But one of the aha moments in it, in good stereotypical fashion, it happened in the bath, where I like to sit and read. And I was reading a book called The World We're In by sort of a pseudo-lefty Will Hutton. And I was reading a bit about the IMF and the structural development funds. And it suddenly struck me that these bureaucrats have killed millions of people. This decision to move money out of public health systems, out of telling people to grow cash crops to pay their debts, were responsible for millions upon millions of deaths. And that was when I really realised that things maybe weren't as complicated as I could have thought. Actually, people weren't trying to make the world a better place. They weren't trying to help other people. There was a lot of people that were, for whatever reason, trauma, etc., were enacting systems that were destroying people and the planet. And not because they weren't aware of it, it's because they chose not to be aware of it, perhaps. But certainly many were, in the same way that that the slavers and all those people involved in the slave trade had to pretend that people with different colour skin weren't really human, because otherwise they couldn't justify treating them worse than animals in many cases. So a lot of that reason is why I'm sitting here with you, listening to other lovely people, because I'll put myself in the lovely person bracket, because I must be, because I'm here with you guys. Yeah, trying to work this stuff out and knowing that the clock is ticking faster and faster, and which probably means we need to slow down, but I'd also like us to move past the damaging patterns which seem to repeat themselves with such ferocity. And I don't know who I pass on to now. Eva, back to Eva.
Back to me. We've gone round the circle. Wow. Thank you. It was just lovely to hear everybody. Well, yeah, lovely, if often painful. So moving into our second round, which is about sort of what resources us, or gives us hope or supports us. And aware also that there's been a minor conversation happening in the background. We haven't done this before, as you may have gathered, and somewhat making it up as we go along. We had thought that we would invite people to leave this room, this Zoom room, and go to another Zoom room if you want to be part of a sharing circle. But we're now thinking, why don't we just stay here? So after this round, we'll just open up to anyone in the wider circle who wants to speak. And I think we might share a list of your names in order just to kind of keep faff to the minimum. And if you don't want to speak when it's your turn, you either just say so or type it in the chat, or some way of indicating that you don't want to. And for those of us who are part of the kind of invited circle, can we maybe try to kind of be concise with what we're saying, so that we leave time for others, and maybe just share one piece and aim for speaking about 2 minutes-ish. So really succinct. I hope that makes sense with everyone. And if you don't want to share afterwards and you don't want to hear everyone, obviously it's okay to leave at any point. And nobody should feel obliged. So with that, unless there's anything else that I have forgotten, in which case shout, I'll go to my bit of resourcing. Which I guess is for me something that kind of thunked into place, or has been thunking into place in my understanding of how we've got into this situation. That is probably really bloody obvious to many of you, but it's been late in coming to me. And it's this understanding of trauma, and the fact and the ways that it acts, the habits that it has of being unconscious, of us not knowing when it's happening, of it seeming like it's normal, and of it repeating, and in fact of it almost sort of creating opportunities to repeat. Because it's a cycle, a kind of like a physical that has to happen because it wants to be healed. It's something that got hurt that wants to be healed, and we don't have in this culture, we don't have collective practices or a shared narrative about how that happens. It happens in individual rooms in psychotherapy. If you're lucky, or if you're luckier in kind of body work, But for most of us, it's just not something that we think about, and yet it's so crucial to being able to understand what's going on for me personally, to understand why some situations I cannot handle and I don't behave in the ways I want to behave, to understand what goes on between me in my close relationships, but also in my further out relationships. And then the understanding that our culture is traumatized, not just those with a lot of power and not just those with none who get on the kind of shit end, but everybody in between, and all of our social structures, which doesn't mean that there aren't healthy bits in all of that as well, because there's that, you know, I have plenty of trauma and I also have plenty of health, and it's that kind of complex interplay between that kind of need for healing and that already healed and wholeness that gives me a lot of hope. Because if we can address that, and this whole process is about trying to do that process of making that conscious, not just as individuals and not just as a healing therapy group, but as people who see the need for social and collective cultural change. I just, like, for me, that's a game changer. And it feels really scary because you're still not allowed to say any of that stuff. You're still not allowed to go into Westminster and start talking about your trauma. And in fact, that whole system either needs to go, which I suspect, or just, you know, can you imagine that if it actually took that on, what would happen? I can hardly imagine that. But it's just like, suddenly it feels to me that there's possibilities. There's places to go, and all of that is towards being more whole and more in touch with life, more in touch with one another and with ourselves. And yeah, that's my support. And I can't remember who I'm passing to, but there's too many chat messages. David, over to you.
Thanks, Eva, and thanks everyone else who's contributed in the first round, and thank you to everyone who's witnessed that as well. It's I guess being trying to be succinct, I think the pandemic has been sort of awful and there's almost nothing good about it, but I think, and I hate Zoom, but one of the only, this kind of thing, I think the fact that we can use this kind of medium to bring together people literally all around the world, and it is just a small number of people, but it's a global happening. I think there's a lot of hope in that, actually, and I think yeah, building that kind of international solidarity feels more possible when you have something like this as a means to do that, to kind of connect people sort of beyond borders. So there's a little seed of hope. Yeah, so that's on to Karen, I think, now.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that I get hope from trying to soften to the people around me, trying to be forgiving of my own shame and guilt in my role in this whole machine, but also trying to really settle into the friendships and family relationships and connection with individual human beings that I think that's where the sustenance comes from, that thing of feeling like you have, I mean, the feeling that we all have the kind hearts of other people around us and behind us. And I think another thing is that I think we can sometimes box ourselves into, we can pigeonhole our own way of thinking about this kind of problem, because it's a massive, multi-layered problem that just sort of expands out into infinity. And as you try to sort of think of solutions, everything's connected to everything else, and it's pretty overwhelming. But we are resourceful people, and all the generations before us have had to be resourceful people too. But this is our moment to live our lives, and this is our gift as well, to live this life in this time, even although there are scary things. And we need to step into that to be able to, in a tender-hearted way. And I really liked what I think it was maybe Teresa said earlier on about relearning how to be human. I think there's a lot of that, about that sort of authentic, honest feeling, and trying not, and in a world when so many things are polarized by, sorry, I'm rambling now. I realize I'm doing that thing we're not supposed to do. So what I was going to say is, we're surrounded, the way our media works and our social media works is sort of very polarizing, but in ourselves, I think working to try and not be polarized, even though we have to kind of actively try and do that, is a very sustaining thing, because we reconnect with each other's humanity.
So it's Zarina, and sorry about, I posted that other order a bit early, so that's for later on. But Zarina.
I was getting confused. I thought I had to pass it to Helen.
Yeah, sorry.
And I'm happy to do that if Helen wants to go next. But yeah. Oh God. So what gives me hope? I suppose it's a few things. It's not just one. So I'd like to share something about my childhood again. When I was younger, I used to go to Islamic classes after school. There used to be an elderly imam who used to teach us, but he was very physically abusive. He was a tyrant. He was horrible. And my whole time, the 2 hours, every night when I was there, I used to just think of a rebellion. I used to count the number of children that were there and think, there's more of us, there's one of him. We can get him down. We can do this, And this is like, my whole childhood was spent rebelling against this guy. Then growing up, thinking about like Britain and the size of Britain in the context of the world and how small Britain was. And I still find it really difficult to understand how Britain colonized so much of the world. But then I just think, well, get classified as being an ethnic minority, but actually we're a global majority. So it's like rethinking that term and thinking, well, actually, the majority is bigger than the ones that are colonizing. So we've got hope. We've got a hope. And it goes back to what David was saying about being connected, being able to be connected on this global platform, and all these like different global platforms now. And you see people reclaiming their culture, reclaiming their identity. And that's really given me hope. So I'll pass it over to Dorothy.
I don't know what gives me hope. I know it's not my intellect. I know it's not my ego. It's just the way a certain light is, a certain day, or a way a person is, or a way an animal is. I have no idea, but it's very much there. And it's just something about being alive, something about life. So on the one hand, there was so much grief and pain and trauma. On the other hand, it's just beautiful. and people can be cruel, and there's inequality and war and domination. And then there's the deepest, gentlest kindness and care. That's me.
Is that me then?
Callum.
Yeah. So I want to do two things. I'll talk about two things. One is I want to sing a song, but I also want to go back to a bit about trauma, because that's quite a positive impression as me as well. My high school was juxtapositioned against one of the most elite schools in Edinburgh and in the UK as well. So there was a road that separated us. So my family got up in the morning to serve breakfast so that some of them could eat. And at the same time, while we were playing 22-a-side football with Fest and Pants, a la Kez, the movie, we were watching helicopters and £500,000 cars turning up and stuff like that. And latterly, when I went back to work there, I found that because I was working with that community that were in the elite school, realised that a lot of them were traumatised as well and really struggling. And that gave me they're not all, excuse my friend, I'm not going to swear, but they're not, they need support and they need shown alternative ways. And at that point earlier on, I think it gave me some drive to want something different and strive on. And when I said I was weird earlier on, because I was the first in my family to go to higher education, because I was looking for alternatives, looking for different ways, and that's been good. My education was community education. Some here I know will recognise that. And I've got a cheery disposition, so I meet lots of people, can befriend, and that's good. And the song that I want to sing is because I've been part of the Edinburgh COP Coalition and met lots of people, been in the city centre, met lots of students from international. And the song that I was thinking about when I heard about a Sunset Assembly was something Scots heritage. And going back to what I said earlier on about my family being, so the author of the song was a bit of a bugger in terms of the way that he treated women. But it's a song that's sung in Scotland at sunsets at the end of the year and at the end of celebration in Scottish culture. So it's Auld Lang Syne. And for them that know it, it's about recognising people that you've shared experiences with. And I feel a bit wobbly and tearful. I'll push on. But it's about connecting with people you've shared experiences with and new friends and new journeys. So I'm going to sing it. I'll try and make it quick and I'll cut out a lot of the verses, etc. But I'll sing what we normally sing, which goes, for Auld Lang Syne, my Joe. For all. I'm not going to sing that version. Actually, can somebody sing it? I've just had a blank. Why is that happening? For Auld Lang Syne, my dear, for all. Oh, it's gone. Somebody start me off. I've got two songs in my head, two versions of that song in my head, and they're for.
Should old acquaintance.
That's the first line. Well done. Feel free to sing it with me if you want. Go on, sing it with me. Should old acquaintance be forgot,
forsake Auld Lang Syne. For Auld Lang Syne, my dear, for Auld Lang Syne. We'll take a cup of kindness, forsake of Auld Lang Syne.
So here's and my trusty friend, and Grisa, and to thine, I'll take a right good whirlywig for the sake
of old lang syne.
How could I forget? I think I've done that thousands of times. Anyway, do you get the gist of the song? Do you know what it's about? You'll all sing it. But it's about looking back and looking forward by the experiences and friends that you've had and about to make. So thanks for that. What an arse I made of that, eh? How can I do that? So it's over to whoever it is. Luke.
Thanks for that, Callum. And thanks for Auld Lang Syne. Hope's a funny thing. Like, there's a difference between hope and optimism. So I'm not optimistic, but you know, I am hopeful. And partly that's just looking at how tenacious life is, and culture and community. It is really tenacious. It's really, really hard to kill. It can be suppressed, it can be discriminated against, it can be attempted to be annihilated, but it always kind of springs back. The industrial civilization, the domination system, there's no hope for that. Like that is fragile and brittle and will fall, and it will either be a collapse or it will be an amazing global effort to turn things around and have a planned degrowth. But one way or the other, it's out, it's gone. There's no hope for that. But there is hope for, there's hope for us, you know, there's hope for people, there's hope for communities, there's hope for, you know, indigenous nations that have already often survived the end of the world many times. The end of the world as we know it is not the end of the world, full stop. So that's what I cling to, the sense that things can be lost. So much has been lost and can be. But there's something about the human spirit that is perennial, that emerges. So I think that's probably what's immediately coming to mind with that. So I'm not sure who I hand on to now. Is it back to you, Justin? No.
Try Mark. We'll try Mark this time. Go for it, Mark.
All right, Mark, then you, okay. But Mark, oh yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah. I want to speak about coral, which is a really weird thing. I listened to a program about coral and about how it lives. It's symbiotic. It grows. It survives bleaching events and things like that. It's just the incredible beauty and complexity and wonderfulness of each one of you and the world around us. And if we can't get hope out of that, then, you know, we need to open our hearts a little bit wider, perhaps. But that's where I can get it. Looking at each one of your faces give me hope. So thank you most kindly. And I'll pass on to Justin.
Well, I was just in the same place as you, Mark, so that's why we were both speaking. Just remembering on the Govern Free State website, there's something like, there's nobody coming to rescue us. It's just us. There's just us. But we are a vast number of beings, you know, like Luke says, just such a resilient resourcefulness. So that's one side of my hope, is just like the kind of the amazing, you know, concrete, the grass comes through, just that absolute resurgence. And when there isn't a war, it feels to me like then generations heal before the next war traumatizes people. And we're in a war that's traumatizing the world. So I guess part of the hope is that resilience, but the other part is just me and Eva, who live together, get into really bad states. Okay, this is after decades of being together. We get into kind of trauma states where we really aren't in a good place, or at least I get into that. I shouldn't say that about Eva. Let me say it to myself. Speak for myself. I can get into a bad state, and I find that amazing that we can get into bad states. And I can get into a bad state where I'm kind of possessed almost. You know, I'm feeling resentful and bitter, and you know, whatever. Little Justin who's angry about things that happen to him, and then it plays out in the present. And the reason why I find that hopeful is because I can just drop out of that then. And I feel like as a culture, that's what we need to do. And that's what we can do, is just drop out of this complete lie that we've been taught to live. Just drop right out of it. There's a dominant system that is just not helping anyone at all. And it's based on the notion that if I'm more important than you, then I'll feel better about myself. If I have something and you don't, I'll feel better about myself. It's based just on simply on that notion that I'm separate from you and I need to control you in order to be okay. And it's just a lie. And I learned it as a little person. And we've all learned it, I'd say. And the truth is that my well-being entirely depends on your well-being. Entirely. My empathy is my only route to sanity and to well-being. And it's a really powerful route. It is like that grass coming through the concrete. It's really, really strong, that empathy, that wish for health. So it's a weird, my hope lies in the fact that that resourcefulness of kind of coming back to ourselves is absolutely there. And is my experience, my hope is also my experience of getting into that trauma state so easily, but knowing that we can drop out of it. So it's like, oof, how do we re-inhabit that? And part of it is just actually accepting and looking at trauma and looking at how traumatic the system is. And I'm being told to wrap up, but I guess the one thing I want to say is, yeah, there's no hope in the system, like Luke's saying there's no hope in the system, but we are kind of taught that humanity is the problem. And it's really important to realize that our humanity is not the problem. The problem is this really inhumane system of exploitation that we get caught up in. That's the problem. Our humanity is absolutely fucking wonderful. And I can feel it here. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That was amazing. So I've done a new list, which has some people missed off because they have already told me they don't want to speak. So which puts you in first place, Mark, if you can handle that. I just want to say David's away. Cheerio, David. Ben just left. I think you have to go, Mark. Bye-bye. Thank you. Is that you away too, Luke?
Maybe shortly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can all drop in and out. The list is a guideline. Feel free to pass if you want to. And just to say that we have this room until 8:30, when the US will come on a little bit before 8:30. So, which gives us, I think, roughly 2 to 3 minutes each. So I'll do a similar kind of roundy-uppy, which is a soft, just to let you know it's been about 3 minutes. So try finishing up. And if we end up with people who still want to speak, and the Americans are coming, we do have the other channel, and I'm really happy to hop over there. It was my role was to host that. So I think that's probably enough from me. Yeah, so, and this is just about reflections. Anything you want to say, having been in the room, having heard what's been heard, or if you haven't been here that long, just anything else that you might want to share. So Mark, please, if you are willing to speak, then please do.
Yes, I am. I am willing and I will. I was going to say willing and able, but that's not for me to judge. So yeah, I was thinking about what gives me hope, and it's the wonderful way that the universe works, because somebody else picked up on it. The silver lining of COVID is the way that we now use this medium. Is that the sound of Mark's stove? It's not the sound of my stove. No, it's the sound of the rain, because there's a plastic dome at the top that lets a lot of the light in, and when the rain lands on that, it's quite loud. Yeah. So yes, the brilliance of the universe in bringing COVID along just at the time when we all needed to slow down and realize that we have this amazing technology that allows us to do things like this tonight and tomorrow. And that we can stop flying around the world and trying to solve everybody's problems by being in different places and attending different meetings, like is happening in Glasgow. And realize that we can just sit down and talk to each other and listen to each other and learn from each other. So, yeah, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful timing, I think, of this virus. I have fears about other aspects of what's happening in relation to this virus, but maybe that's the silver lining, and it gives me hope, because it's in organizations like Grassroots to Global doing what they're doing that I see hope. And already through the Reworlding conference, we've established the reach, and yeah, I think hopefully tonight the next 24 hours will be another massive success, I think. And yeah, that's all from me. I want to pass to Vicky, I think. Is it? Yeah.
Thank you. Amazing to be here, and amazing to hear people's stories. Unfortunately, I have to go in a minute, but I did want to just reflect on it's the sort of duality of everybody's experience. No one is one thing, and I'm Jewish and I'm British, and I don't really know what that means. I'm sort of rootless and rooted all at once, and I've kind of explored this a lot over the last few years and feel that I'm very much always in the place of duality, whether I'm kind of feeling privileged or oppressed, or all these things that we go through as because we're not single. Very few of us can say we're single things. So I'm fascinated by that, and I'm fascinated by the us and them. And when we recognize that we are, I don't have to tell the people here that we all know that we're all us, but when we really sit down and understand that there is no right or wrong anymore, and if we can rise above that, we can make huge changes, because it's for all of us to change. And I find that quite exciting, because I feel that buzzing around everywhere at the moment. So that feels really live for me. And also what gives me hope is that I always feel humans when they're kind of, when it comes here, the best comes out of people. And I think that's going to happen soon, and this is the time, and we have to imagine our way into making the best of it. I'm sure we will rise to the occasion, because we have that capacity, and we create the future we want. So I am optimistic that we will choose to make the moment that we are destined to be. So I am riding with optimism through all this, whilst I'm in tears through a lot of it too. But thank you. It's been really fascinating. I'm looking forward to the next few weeks. What comes?
So it's Chris now.
I feel mine follows actually from Vicky, about having conflicting dual things going on in ourselves. This morning I went to Ingliston for my COVID booster, and I was overwhelmed with gratitude and also anger and great sadness, because I know there are people dying who never had one vaccination. And to me, that is the challenge and the hope of what we're facing now, is that there are conflicting emotions. And I guess the hope part comes in that I'm learning to experience I can have these conflicting feelings and not be crippled, and I can continue with them. I can feel anger and sadness and hope and gratitude all at the same time. So I guess this booster today today's experience represents that for me. And they do go hand in hand. But I think the other part of the hope is coming to this tonight and realizing how many people are experiencing hope. And I don't need to say more. I think that's, thank you for being here. It was a good evening. But I do have to go, so thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Lovely to see you. Bye-bye. And it was Svenja next, if you're willing.
Okay, my daughter has just stopped squeaking, so I'll see how far I'll get. Thank you, and thanks to everyone for this really heartfelt and the depth of the sharing that has been happening here. And I think I was just, it did make me reflect on my own, my feet on the ground, as, I think during the last 5 years, I was like increasingly feeling as, a German Scot, a migrant, one who's got, who carries a lot of privilege, and also trauma of having ancestors who were small-scale farmers struggling under successive dictatorships, refugees, migrants, and Nazi sympathizers. So all of these things, it's the multitudes that we all contain, and how that's shaped the sort of witnessing of what's unfolding all around us. And I don't know how to speak about hope in this context, but I think for me it's bringing into focus the sort of, as many of you have said already, the human, like being human, the sort of focus of this crazy journey of life and death, and the cyclic pathways that we all, that we all part of, that are unfolding in front of our eyes. And just being immersed in it all. And I think climate change is, it just makes it all so much more real, and so much more, like, brings it so much closer, and so much it basically asks us to wake up in a way that has perhaps more of it, can make us feel alive more by coming to terms with the possibility of our own death. Or so I have to go shortly as well. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Svenja. Lovely to hear your baby there. So I've changed the order a little bit, and I've been asked to put, I think it's Posa first, because she has to leave. And I've taken some people out who've left and people who don't want to speak. And this is ongoing, guys, but here's the new order. And you're going to translate, are you, Mikey? Thank you.
Ahí tienes la palabra, Guaira.
Ya voy. Hola. ¿Ya? ¿Sí me escuchan? ¿Sí me escuchan?
Sí.
Ah, bueno, bueno. Mayelan, chu mari puravelan naveyu namu iguambia ushenguri linja waminjuave yunyim linja pureish escocia gati linja waminji puramra. Reciban un saludo pues desde el pueblo Misac, desde el departamento del Cauca, Colombia. Pues quien les habla, pues Guaira. Justo pues en este momento pues nos ha convocado a este espacio como gente que somos y como parte pues de este territorio tan grande que es la Casa Grande, que es el planeta Tierra. Entonces pues en torno a lo que se ha estado pues compartiendo pues en el transcurso pues de este espacio, algo que ahorita pues que yo pues podría pues comentar al respecto sería en cuanto a la pregunta que han realizado sobre dónde buscar la esperanza cuando parece tan difícil. Y quizás puedo decir de que esa esperanza de resistir, pues de estar como en este ámbito, en este territorio pues grande, estar bien, no solamente como personas, sino el estar bien con todo, pues con todas las formas de vida que existen, ¿no? Aquí en nuestro entorno y más allá de esto también. Puedo decir que ayer mismo acá en nuestro territorio, pues estuvimos en un intercambio pues de productos que se siembran en nuestro territorio, que es un trueque como lo llaman, un intercambio de semillas, un intercambio pues de alimentos. Y para mí la esperanza ha estado desde hace mucho tiempo y han sido los pueblos y ha sido mi propio pueblo. Para pues combatir a este sistema pues que nos está abrazando y nos está lastimando cada vez más, no solamente a nosotros como gente, sino a la misma tierra. La esperanza misma pues está en nosotros mismos también, en estos espacios que también nuestros mayores pues nos dicen y también sabemos que es así, que es nuestro cuerpo también nuestro territorio, y si nuestro territorio, que es el cuerpo, pues está bien, así mismo lo va a estar también, pues también vamos a querer lo mismo para la tierra, ¿no? Entonces, pues Mikey, sí es como eso, ¿no? Lo que tú ahorita me estabas diciendo en cuanto a buscar la esperanza cuando parece tan difícil. Entonces puedo decir de que acá en el pueblo pues de Guambía, justamente en mi pueblo Misac, todos los días es eso, ¿no? En cuanto a construir más que todo, más allá de ir buscando, pues también es sabiendo que hacemos parte pues de la tierra, hemos ido construyendo en conjunto con ella para pues estar, así como decimos, estar vivos en este tiempo-espacio, y que justamente ahorita pues nuestra misma memoria nuestra como pueblo Misag y la misma memoria de la tierra, pues nos ha hecho como levantarnos como pueblos. Y hace poco, no sé si hasta ya se haya escuchado pues el gran paro del levantamiento pues del pueblo que se hizo acá en Colombia en torno a la masacre que se está realizando acá pues a la gente, y no solo a la gente, sino también al territorio con la minería. Pues está pues bastante complicado en todo el territorio colombiano y prácticamente en toda Latinoamérica, y puedo hablar de América en general, que es pues la casa grande en donde pues habitamos todos. Entonces, pues desde los pueblos, desde el pueblo Misaga, estamos pues en ese proceso de resistencia, dando la voz hacia las gentes, hacia las personas pues que conozcan esto que está pasando, y más allá de conocer, pues también podamos unirnos desde el lugar donde ustedes se encuentran y desde otros rincones pues del planeta, a que no se siga destruyendo la tierra y todo lo que pues habita en ella, y asimismo a la gente. Entonces, eso.
Gracias, Guaira. Voy a tratar de compartir en inglés lo que dijiste. So, Guaira said, many greetings from the Misak people from Cauca, Colombia. My name's Guaira. I've joined this space, this territory, which is our earth. I'd like to say that about the question where to find hope, where it looks so hard. I can say that the hope of resistance, of being in the space, this grand territory, we need to be well as people, and also within all the spaces that exist. Just yesterday in our territory, we were having an exchange of products that are planted in our territory, a barter of foods and seeds. So the hope for me is partly in indigenous peoples, in my own people, to fight this system that is hurting us so much, not just as people, but the earth itself. Hope is in us too, in these spaces, like where we are now, also in our elders. If our territory, which is our body, is well, then we will also be well. So here in Gwambia, every day this is our struggle, to construct rather than looking for. It's about knowing we are part of the earth and we need to construct with her. Just now, our memory as the Misak people has made us rise up as a people. I don't know if you heard about the big demonstrations that happened in Colombia as a movement to stop the abuses that are happening to us, to defend this great house where we all live. So as Misak, we are in this process of resistance, and we need to unite all together from all the corners of the planet to defend the earth. Thank you, Guaira. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ustedes
Thank
también
you.
por estar en este espacio. Mua.
Thank you so much, and thanks for translating as well, Mikey. So Anayi, if you're still with us.
Gracias, hermanos de Colombia. Aquí desde Chile, thank you so much to the Colombian brother and sister. I have been listening to you, understanding, not always, but feeling a lot. I'm feeling a lot. And thank you so much for creating this space. I have this feeling of this, we're a circle sitting, and through this circle, a lot of healing is happening. It's new for me, part of the history I hear you share, and at the same time is so similar that, yeah, I feel on a side no separation in the pain and healing together. So thank you for putting all this together and yeah, allowing this to happen. I have no many more words, but the belief that a lot of these spaces need to happen and that there is no separation, that finally the narrative doesn't matter so much when the heart is together. So thank you so much, and I leave the stick in the center.
Thank you, Anai. Lovely to hear your words. So the ongoing shaping up list, which doesn't include Carol, I'm really sorry, I'll add you, but it has Kate next.
Thank you. I'm picking up the stick from Anai. I love what you said about the narrative not mattering when the heart is there, but I want to say my appreciation for the space to hear the narrative. I loved hearing the different dimensions of Scottish history and responses to Scottish history. And I live in Scotland, but I'm not Scottish. I'm married into Scotland, as maybe they would say. But it feels like coming home to hear what people are saying. And so the space to hear that, and to hear that from Scotland, but then also from Colombia and elsewhere, is just lovely. And so really my only sense is a real appreciation that the space exists and that we are able to use it and take advantage of it, and that this is the start of 24 hours. It blows my mind. But thank you, and real appreciation. So let me pass the stick back, or pass the stick on. Is this now to Cara?
Who I think might not be with us any longer. So the next would be Carol. Surprise leap.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm sorry I've missed the beginning. I've come into this really late, so I really appreciate being here and joining. And wow, how powerful a language I don't understand, but to feel the energy and the hope and our interconnectedness and interdependency. I tingles. I don't want to use this space to speak. I want to witness. I want to hear. Thank you. And I will pass then. Where am I? To Kate. Oh no, Jennifer. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, and hello, everyone. I regret to inform you that the Americans have already arrived. I'm part of the next gathering, and I wanted to be here to witness all of you and the ways that you have shared so richly and beautifully. And so I will only say my profound gratitude for what I have heard, which makes my own heart beat even stronger. And to imagine this for the next 24 hours going around the globe, it's really potent. I feel it in every cell of my being. And so I just thank you all for creating your space and time to begin this and to end it in 24 hours. So thank you.
So Saul is not keen on speaking. Peter, would you like the word?
Sorry, did you say Dita?
I did.
I only heard a ta, which is good. Yeah, I've been a bit in the background, just listening with a lot of my heart, but little of my hands and very little of my brain. And yeah, like Anaï was saying, just really feeling that big connection. Yeah, and I've been discovering more and more how similar so many of our stories are, of being disconnected from our lands, of being shifted and moved by others who in turn have been shifted and moved and oppressed. So there is that cascade of effects that I feel affecting my life so strongly, even though I've only experienced my life and not that of my ancestors. And I just feel the hope that I have is that, much like with the body and the mind, I sense that there is a plasticity, that also we can have a cascade of effects that connect us back to the land, that connect us back to people, to each other, like this circle. Listening to all of you, I feel enlarged, expanded, connected. And there's that beauty of being human that I not so often feel, and it's very present right now. I think it takes a few people, like I said at the beginning, to start something. And I think we are way, way, way many more than we think. There's so many people today doing amazing stuff, supporting, loving, caring, listening. I can feel them somehow supporting my back. Thank you for being here, everyone.
Thank you, Dita. Ian, welcome. I see you've just arrived. We're just going round the people who are here speaking for a couple, 2-3 minutes. And I'm updating the order as people drop in and out and send me messages that they don't want to speak. So I'm just going to put a new order in now. Please give a shout if you haven't spoken and would like to, or even if you have spoken, because there's so few of us now. But Mikey, you were next on the list if you would like to have some moments.
Thanks. Yeah, we've had a crazy rainstorm over the last 30 minutes while this has been going on, and the terrace flooded. I ran off for a little bit to see what was going on. So yeah, the climate is ever present. But that was, yeah, thank you everyone. It was so good to hear everyone, and really related with was it Zara, who was talking about not really knowing where she's from, and I definitely have that kind of feeling, and kind of heard quite a lot of people talking about that. And yeah, so it was really yeah, it was really important to hear what folk had to say about that, and also really interesting to hear about that first session on thinking about kind of colonialism and in Scotland, and all the complexities of where we've come from and who we are, and what makes us up from our histories. So yeah, really wonderful to hear everyone, and thanks a lot for creating this space.
Thank you, Mikey. Helen.
Hi, I'm not going to say very much. I actually wasn't going to say anything at all, but suddenly a poem popped into my mind, and it was actually hearing Auld Lang Syne being sung, and which was written by Rabbie Burns, who is a very famous Scottish poet and one of my favourite poets as well. And I felt, because I'm aware that the Scottish group is kind of finishing here, but it felt a nice poem to read. I won't read it all, and apologies to people who are maybe not so familiar with the Scottish dialect. And it's a man's a man for all that. And there's a couple of lines in it just to pick out. The rank is but the guinea stamp, the man's the gowd for all that, which is basically saying the guinea is the coin, and the rank on it is the stamp on it, but it's the gold itself that is the man, it's the gowd for all that. So, and that's just disappeared from my screen. Here we go. Is there for honest poverty that hangs his head and all that? The coward slave we pass him by, we dare be poor for all that. For all that and all that, our toils obscure and all that. The rank is but the guinea stamp, the man's the gowd for all that. What though on hamely fare we dine, wear modern grey and all that, gay fools their silks and knaves their wine, a man's a man for all that. For all that and all that, their tinsel show and all that, the honest man, though e'er sae poor, is king of men for all that. Then let us pray that come it may, as come it will for all that sense and worth o'er all the earth shall bear the gree and all that. For all that and all that is coming yet for all that man to man, the world o'er shall be, there shall brothers be for all that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Claire, would you like a word?
Hello, I would. I feel like a little bit of an interloper because I've come in early for the next session, and yes, I'm a little uncomfortable with stepping into shared space that's been building and weaving itself over time. So thank you for the chance to be here anyway. I want to thank Helen for your beautiful voice. It was just like lying in a stream and the water was just gently running over me. It was truly a beautiful, beautiful sensation. So thank you. And I want to share something I literally just saw on LinkedIn because it made me smile and it tickled me. And I hope it might do the same for you. And it says this, and this is not from me. My company does this icebreaker thing where every week a different person sends an email to the whole company talking about their average day. And today's co-worker started his I wake up each day furious to be labouring under capitalism. And it has caused quite a stir. And so I liked it because my advocacy work is about voicing what is accurate for each of us. And I do it on behalf of myself and I do it on behalf of the planet, whether I'm speaking or sounding and singing or whatever it might be. So I'm just happy to be here. I feel profoundly humbled by the space and grateful for the sincerity that I am experiencing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
And thank you, Claire.
Yes, thank you, Claire. Sorry, I was muted. Ian is next. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Good evening from the north of Scotland. I tried to join earlier, but I was unable. So I'm not quite sure what's been talked about, but why I'm here because the COP is in my country, and I'm here because I was at COP1 in Berlin in 1995 as a young, angry climate activist. I'm a 55-year-old angry climate activist now, but my work is as a self-employed sustainability consultant, and I have been hugely energized by the framework and many of the other frameworks which offer ways out of the mess that we're in. And the framework which I like the most is it's called the natural step, and I recommend anybody to look at it. It's a scientific way of looking at the problem, but it breaks the issues down into 4 principles, 3 ecological principles. There are actually only 3 ways that we destroy the planet. There are millions of ways in which these principles play out in detail. But the 4th principle is the social principle, the people. It's about the people and culture. And when I first discovered this framework, I was so blown away by the fact that the way we actually destroy the ecology can be congregated in these 3 principles that I sort of ignored the social principle, but over time I came to realize that this was actually the most important one. And as a Scotsman, I'm very connected to my past. I know where my family are from. I can trace it back 300 years to not far from where I am now. I'm a folk musician, like Helen, who talked earlier. I'm a big fan of Robbie Burns. The songs and the bagpipe tunes in particular that I play are rooted in hundreds of years of evolution. They sound the way they sound now, but they actually come from tunes which are hundreds of years old and have evolved over time. So I connect to my culture through that, and I look forward to contributing through the actual COP in Glasgow, through that music, and that's what actually drew me to this event when I saw it. I just thought that's such a beautiful idea of this sort of rolling process going around the world and people joining in as their time allows. So yeah, that's what just brought me here, to see what other kind of smashing people are around, because that's what it's all about ultimately. It's difficult for a Glaswegian to own up and say that actually the most important thing he's discovered in 30 years of climate activism is the importance of love. It's very, very difficult for a Glaswegian man to say that, but hey, that's the truth. So lovely to see you all. Thanks very much. And if you're in Glasgow and you see me playing pipes, please come and say hello. Kerry.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for fessing up. That's mostly what we've been talking about, one way or another. So you're among friends. So Ben, and then the last word on the Scottish Circle from Callum, and then we'll hand over to the Turtle Island people.
That was hilarious, Ian. And also so true. I have the same experience from a different, more American, used to think of myself as white, trying not to so much male perspective. Yeah, we don't like to talk about love in these sorts of contexts. Certainly not as a theory of change in the political and economic realm, right? Which makes me think, that, or reminds me of this idea that in some ways maybe what we're all part of is some kind of new religion, and that also is a word that carries a lot of baggage in a lot of circles. My father-in-law famously used to say, "Religion has fucked up the world." For a while, my wife and I were Unitarian Universalists, which I think has some deep Scottish roots, among others. I've been reading some science fiction where the idea comes up. Kim Stanley Robinson's recent book, The Ministry for the Future, which basically starts from the Paris Accords and says, could we paint a realistic picture of how within 30, 40 years we actually solve the climate crisis? And they're one of the couple of the lead characters, I think, in that muse about the possibility that we need a new religion. It's that Stephanie Mines, who I first connected to because she was organizing the Climate Change and Consciousness Conference in Findhorn, kind of named that among many others. The idea that a shift in consciousness is fundamentally what's needed here and what's happening. And isn't that a kind of religious experience? I do a lot of little things that seem objectively silly. And my best way of explaining them to myself and others is that it's a spiritual practice. Other people just say I'm a perfectionist, or weird, or lazy or something. But, I heard some questions at the beginning of the last session about, does this matter? We're only talking to a few people, and the forces we're up against are so powerful and strong. And so that's part of where the idea that that we're practicing some kind of religion together helps me make sense of it, or place it into maybe a context where it matters at lots of different levels, including those, most powerful levels, the same levels that have fucked up the world. But what if there really is some kind of new religious, new consciousness that's as powerful as the great religious traditions of the past that have been so influential, including, of course, Christianity in its direct ties to colonialism, which we heard so much about. I took a course not that long ago on the doctrine of discovery. People know about this? A series of papal bulls in I think the 15th century, Columbus was acting directly on those orders, basically said anytime you as a Christian show up somewhere where the people aren't Christian, you can either convert them or you own everything that's there, including them. And that was straight from the Pope. And you're entitled to enslave them, kill them, whatever you want, in God's name. So I don't know, where does that leave us now, or me? Maybe I'm done saying what I have to say, but well, I think the other thing is, like being a Unitarian Universalist was so interesting. I grew up Jewish and not particularly religious in terms of any practice. Wrap it up. Okay. So people said, what's the point of a religion where you don't have any doctrine? And it's like, well, the whole point is all the good stuff, it's community and connecting and doing good works in the world, and a sense of belonging and a sense of place. And I think that there's something globally happening that could be on the scale of billions of people. And we wouldn't even necessarily have a way to know that. That's along those lines.
Thank you, Ben. Callum, the last Scot standing. You want a word?
Right. Hello, everybody. And hello for the people that have just arrived or arrived later. And potentially a saving grace there would have been that you wouldn't have seen me making an absolute arse of one of the most universally known songs on the planet, and I forgot the words, and I should be really embarrassed. Well, I am embarrassed, but I made an arse myself. But I've learned to embrace mistakes, because without mistakes you don't get change, you don't get progression. And as a working class male, I'd mentioned earlier on, it took me a long time to break the shackles off to my own insecurities and my own owning and embracing emotions. And I get quite emotional sometimes. But I owned making an arse of that song. I admitted it and I reached out. And the beauty of that was, in my making mistakes and recognising that and admitting that, there was people in the room that offered to support and help and move us on. And for that, I thank everybody. I knew that was there, and that's why I was able to reach out. I felt the love in the room. I felt the friendship, comradeship, solidarity. And I'm an idealist. I believe in concepts and more than just rationality. I believe in emotions and feelings. So I'm going to go back to Burns, and this time I've lifted up the word so I don't stumble or forget what I'm trying to articulate. But the concepts about love, as Ian had mentioned earlier on, I think it's one of the most powerful emotions, and across this planet, it is one of the only way that we can move forward. So I'm going to highlight a concept, or some concepts, that Mr. Burns had talked about love, and I hope that we can progress in the same way, and these words are true. And the verse that stuck with me when I first heard it many years ago was the concept of love being everlasting, and it'll last till all the seas gang dry and the rocks melt with the sun, and I'll love you still, my dear, forevermore. All the sands of life shall run. And we are at a critical point, and we need the sands of life still to run, and we need our life still to run. And on that concept of love and shared love in the room and shared love across this planet, and love beaming out from Scotland across the world through this medium, this platform, through the work that people who have created the rooms, I'm sending love from Scotland. Goodbye, everybody. That's me.
Thank you, Callum. That was a pretty good last word. Really appreciate it. So that's the Scottish circle closed.